Hi, it's Jeff Davis. Thanks for joining me again as we head out on the wine road. In this week's podcast, we're heading up to Sonoma County's Dry Creek Valley. It's a warmer wine-growing AVA and a good place to grow Zinfandel and Italian varieties. So it's no surprise to find Ben Papapietro there, a winemaker with an Italian heritage. What is surprising is that Ben's preferred variety is Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, cooler climate grapes. We'll touch upon that later in the interview. Back in the 80s, Ben hooked up with his friend Bruce Perry to eventually form Papapietro Perry Winery. Prior to moving to this area, about 6 years ago, my wife and I signed up for their wine club during a visit here. What a pleasure it was to be getting Papapietro Perry Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Zinfandel shipped to us in Arizona. He and I have often missed each other in trying to set up an interview since I've had my radio show, and it has finally happened. He started off his winemaking career like many, in his garage. He is a former garagiste. It's a good story and he has a lot to tell, so let's get to it. I asked him about getting an early education watching his grandfather make wine in his home.
Indeed, it was. The family, everybody participated in that. And the guy would bring the grapes and they'd have a little crusher destemmer on the end of the truck, the flatbed, and they'd dump all the bins into that. And then my grandfather had like a 500-gallon redwood fermenter that they would ferment in. Yeah, so it was quite the family project. And then my grandfather kept 9 or so barrels in his, actually had a wine cellar in his house, so it was unique.
Sounds pretty major for just a home winemaker.
They did it all, they did that and grappa, and they probably did some beer during Prohibition. They lived in a house since before Prohibition. It was a big enough house. He had a lot of kids, so everybody participated in making wine. They brought this from Italy when they came. They didn't know that much about winemaking, but they knew that Italians drank wine, and so they were close to Sonoma, and they had a summer home in Sonoma and bought fruit there and had it delivered.
Oh, great. And naturally being Italian, wine was right there on the table with your food.
It was, always. Although they didn't really have the technique down, so they put a spigot at the bottom of the barrel, and they would draw from that, and about halfway down it would be a little vinegary. So my dad would give my grandfather a bad time. He'd say, "Hey, Pop, pass the vinegar," which a shoe came flying his way when he did that. And my father, from that point on, used ice in his wine, like many old Italians still do, put ice in their wine.
Now, did your dad ever get into the business at all, or as a hobby or anything?
No, it skipped over that generation. All of his brothers, siblings, all went and fought in the Pacific in the Navy. They were in the Navy, and they came back. That was probably the last thing they were involved in doing. They didn't want to make wine. They wanted to get back to normalcy and, raising kids and that. So it kind of hopped over one generation. But I always had an interest in it. When we had family parties, I would go down to the youngest one in my group and put the rubber hose in the barrel and sample them when no one was looking.
And that led to developing a taste for better wine. So I read that you enjoy tasting wines from around the world, even some of the nicer California wines.
I was very lucky having that background. Early on, some of my friends worked in wine stores, and we were able to, in the late 60s, really taste some of the most fantastic wines at really good prices. They were expensive then, but not like today. We were drinking Bordeaux's, and that we had to pay like $10 or $12, and
that is kind of pricey back then.
Yeah, but you were drinking first and second gross. A friend worked at the Cannery wine shop in the Cannery in North Beach, or in Fisherman's Wharf, and so we had access to some great wines. And so in the late 60s, and then in the early 70s, I tasted a 1957 Hospice de Beaune that changed the way I approached wine. That knocked my socks off. And then my friend Bert started making Pinot up in the Russian River in the middle 70s and focused on Pinot Noir. And right then I knew that's what I wanted to do.
The Italian wines just didn't quite grab you like the Burgundian wines.
No, although there was so little Pinot Noir around at the time, it was so unique that California Pinots, and then to have like a guy that was probably the best known Pinot producer in our area, or one of the top 5 in California. Bert Williams had a fantastic palate, and to be able to taste those early wines was unbelievable.
Yeah, and what a great friendship to have and to help inspire you and boost you into your passion for making wine.
Indeed, he was a mentor to many people. There's a lot of us out there, Brogan and Woodenhead and many other ones that guys had started working at Williams-Sonoma and learned from the master about Pinot Noir.
And then when did you become a garagiste?
1980 was my first vintage. I made small amounts of wine. I got some really interesting wines through Wine and the People in Berkeley. They had a store, and they also brokered some really interesting vineyards. We had some Heights and some Martha's Vineyard in the day. Winery Lake, I forget the guy's name, who a very famous grower had the Caneros Pinot Noir that we got. That was the first Pinot Noir I got to work with. But there was so little fruit, I wanted to focus in on Pinot, but there was Cab to be had, and Merlot, Cabernet Franc, and those, but hardly any Pinot. There was just no Pinot.
Yeah, prior to 1980, yeah. Like you said, Bert had some here in Sonoma, but not a whole lot of around. I wouldn't even imagine Carneros would have much back then.
No, I don't think so. Francis Mahoney, Caneros Creek, was one of the early ones, and there was a couple other ones, but like in my area, there's probably 5 guys: Joe Swan, Kistler, Dellinger, Gary Farrell, Bert Williams, and whatever little Pinot was grown, those guys were buying it, and there wasn't anything left over. And it was, every once in a while, there'd be a half ton of Pinot that Bert didn't want to deal with. He would call me and say, "You want to deal with this?" And so we started that way, and by the late 80s, we were starting to get our own sources of Pinot.
And all during this time, you were working in the newspaper industry.
Yeah, I worked there. I started working there in 1965, and I retired in 2003. We started our wine business. Bruce had talked me into going into business in 1998. In 97, he started pushing. In 98, we decided to go. I was totally against it. I had worked at Williams-Sonoma, but I was also general manager at Roots, R-U-T-Z, and knew what it cost because I spent a lot of money help putting his winery together, and I knew as a truck driver I'd never be able to afford that. So I gave Bruce this deal: if you can find a place where we can make wine and only have to pay to use the equipment per ton cost, buy barrels and grapes, if we can do that, if you can find a place where I can make wine like that, then I'll do it. If not, I'm out. And 2 weeks later, he found Windsor Oaks, and we were there from 98 through, we moved to our Timbercrest farm in July of 2005. So we've been here ever since. We're celebrating 20th year this year. This is our 20th year.
And the parade of trucks are bringing in the party supplies for your celebration, huh?
Yeah.
We would choose to do the interview outside, just as the morning trucks were coming and going with their deliveries at Timbercrest Farms. I'm talking with Ben Papapietro of Dry Creek Valley's Papapietro Perry. So while Ben and Bruce were still ingrained in the newspaper business, they would take time off each year to work harvest and craft their wine at Windsor Oak Vineyards and Winery. And like many, they did make sacrifices in the early days.
Yeah, I was deeply passionate about it because we lived on Windsor Oaks property like a campground. I lived 7 years in my van for 3 months a year. And we set up a little stove and little dining room outside. Yeah. So it was like camping. And Bruce at that time was the purveyor. Every day he would bring food, and he would bring stuff for us to drink and keep the ice in the ice chest, so.
For 3 months, huh?
Yeah, for as much time as I get away, and then I'd go back to work when there was no fruit, and I'd come back when we had fruit to process. So it was kind of touch and go, but I pulled that off. But in 2003, it was time. I had put in 37 years at the paper. I was a truck driver. Bruce and I both were in circulation. So I worked 13 years for the Chronicle and the 24 years for the Examiner.
So while you were working in the 80s and 90s, were you making any money at that time?
Well, the reason, I had a great job before I got married, and I had a disposable income, so we were able to buy these great wines. Then I got married, and we had children, and my disposable income got disposed of with education for the kids. That's how I came to starting to make wine, because I thought if I can get good grapes, I could make very good wines, because I couldn't afford it. So what we did is, or what I did, I was very happy to be a bootlegger. Half of what I made, and we were making quite a bit of wine at the time, I would sell it to family and friends, and that would pay for my half that I kept for the year. So it was profitable in a way that I didn't have to pay for wine that I drank.
Yeah, and obviously good enough that your family and friends were fine with giving you money for it.
Well, they were really pretty surprised, but I took it on very seriously. Working, a couple weeks a year at Williams Selling really saw that if you were serious about making good wine, you could do it if you got good grapes. And so I started my home winemaking as a serious project. I was very serious about doing it. So the wines came out good, and people appreciated it, or they wouldn't have bought it from me.
Right.
And they pushed us to go into business. A lot of our friends said we should be doing that. That's what kind of motivated Bruce to want to get into the wine business. But making money, for 10 years after we went into business, all I got was a use of a car the last couple of years. Now it's become a family operation. It's kept two families in business and doing well.
Ben Papapietro, a man who's doing well after paying his dues, like camping out in a vineyard for 3 months of each year. We'll hear about his business since they became a professional winery in the 21st century when On the Wine Road continues. Hey, thanks for sticking around. Now, let's continue On the Wine Road. At this point in the interview, I asked Ben, when did he and Bruce finally decide to pull the trigger to have a bonded winery?
1998 was our first release. We did 75 cases. We had a group of about 5 guys that we would all share the cost, break it down by percentage. Bruce and I had 50%, and we gave the other 50% to the other guys and break it down in 5 and 10%. So we had this group that we made wine as a group, and then as we split it up, our share we kept out, and then when we decided to go into business, we started with the 75 cases we made under bond, and then we doubled almost every year since then till about now we keep it about 8,000 cases.
Yeah. But you're distributed across the country, I imagine.
We're mostly a direct-to-consumer operation. We sell probably a little over 90% of our wine directly from the tasting room through our club. We have a very, very big club, very faithful club that have been with us for many years. So the 10% that we do in the market, my wife is in North Carolina right now selling wine. So we're in about 14 or 15 states, Hawaii.
You've been traveling quite a bit too lately.
Yeah, we have. We do. We also do cruises. We just came back from Australia and New Zealand. We took 64 people to this cruise. We were gone 3 days in the Hunter Valley, then a 14-day cruise from Australia and New Zealand.
That's got to be fun.
Oh, it was fun. This is, like I said, our 6th one. We do one every other year. 2 years ago, we did Marseille to Beaune, which was a river trip, and we had over 70 people. We had a great time.
Well, you continue to make some spectacular Pinot Noir, along with your Chardonnay and Zinfandel, but I love your vineyard designates. Newness and Peters are a couple of our favorites, and you always have Zinfandel. Now, is that a nod to your Italian heritage or being in Dry Creek?
I think it's a bit of both. We even at home, we always made around 6 barrels of Zinfandel. So we always made Zinfandel. We used to make Russian Rivers in, and now we're in Dry Creek. I have access to 2 really terrific vineyards, one at Timbercrest Farms, and across the street I have a Randy Peters Zinfandel plot that belonged to his mom and dad, and it's called Pauline's.
Right.
So we just did a smackdown at Dry Creek Vineyards, invited 28 wineries to participate, and there was 2 people from each winery. So we blind tasted the 28 wines, and then after the 45 minutes we were up, you voted on your favorites, and we had some really terrific big name Zinfandel producers here out of Dry Creek, and Papapietro Perry came in second in the SmackDown. So if my wife told me that she was expecting, I wouldn't have been more surprised.
That's pretty good for a Pinot producer.
Indeed. And so we do make 10 different Pinot Noirs. We make 7 from the Russian River, 2 from the Sonoma Coast, true Sonoma Coast, and 1 from Anderson Valley. And we have a great lineup. We're always looking. We just secured a new vineyard in Green Valley. We've been looking for many years to find some fruit in that area. We really think that's another great place to grow Pinot. So we're working on that. We may have a release of Green Valley here coming up in the future.
I wanted to ask you about your winemaking philosophy. I read that you prefer to have the minimalist approach to your winemaking, but I've noticed that from year to year to year, your wine still has a certain familiar characteristic to it, each vintage. I was wondering if that was part of your barrel program, or is it the yeast you use?
Well, it's a philosophy. I think too many times as a consumer, I had drank a wine from a producer that I loved one year, and then next year it was, what the hell did he do? So what I tried to do over the 19 or 18 years that I perfected my skills was to try to do the same thing with all the vineyards. The same process, the same yeast that I use, and the same cooper, because it unifies all the winemaking styles as one style, and what really shows is not a winemaking style but the actual vineyard. And the idea of Pinot Noir is you want to be able to show the vineyard. So if you do all the things pretty much the same in each vineyard, then what really shows is not the winemaking style, but really shows the vineyard itself. And that's really what the beauty of Pinot Noir is. You can do that. Yeah. So when we get our vineyard in, we pick by clone. We keep each clone separate all through the process, and we barrel each clone separately. Then in the spring, when we make our blends, we put the clones back together that best shows each vineyard. So it might be a different mix of clones each year, but we try to achieve consistency every year, and that way, by doing it that way, I can be very, very consistent from vineyard to vineyard.
What has been the biggest surprise to you over these years, from your humble beginnings to growing to where you are today? Still being in business. It's a very difficult business. Geez, if we would have started a few years later, we may not have been so successful. We started before Sideways, and I think that was a boost for people that didn't know about Pinot Noir, and we just happened to be positioned in the right place at the right time, very fortunately. Yeah. And so you were hitting your stride about that time.
Definitely. So it was perfect for us, and it helped us get known and be a little bit ahead of the pack in that way. But there are so many good Pinot producers. It's become a very difficult business to be in, but we're celebrating our 20th anniversary and still in business. I could say that probably surprises me the most.
Do you have a celebration coming up?
Well, we've been working on a sparkling wine for an event that we will eventually do sometime this year, probably after fall release, and we'll roll out the bubbly on that for that fair.
Be appropriate, huh?
Yes, we did it we had so much fruit a few years ago, some beautiful Chardonnay from the Peters Vineyard, that we decided to drop a little fruit, and we used that for the base for our sparkling wine.
Oh, great. But in your mind, for your 20th anniversary, you got to be thinking it's more like 30, 35, right? Yeah.
Well, 37 years at the paper, and I'm closing in on 37 years in the wine business, so I don't know. I'm waiting for my grandchildren to grow up a little bit, so I have a replacement. I enjoy the business, and it's been a terrific business. I've enjoyed working. I love to play with equipment and making wine. The selling is a little more difficult. I eventually going to have to move over and let someone younger, maybe my daughter or something, come in and sell wine. So right now, my wife and I do all the outside winemaker dinners, and we're the face of the winery right now. And hopefully someday I can maybe turn that over to one of my daughters.
That's the way it works in the wine industry. So many continue as family businesses. He's been Papapietro. His Burgundian wines in Zinfandel are quite enjoyable, and his name is just fun to say, Papapietro. They're on Dry Creek Road in the Timbercrest Farms group of wineries, and they're at papapietro-perry.com. That's Papa, Pietro-Perry.com. I'm glad I finally had the chance to share his story. If you're listening to this on iTunes or another podcast provider, you can learn more about my show at onthewineroad.com and on Facebook as well. I'm on Instagram under the name JD Wine Road and on Twitter at JD Wine Road. I'm Jeff Davis. Thanks for listening to this podcast of On the Wine Road.